As a protege of President Richard Nixon, I'm asked constantly about the iconic photo of President Nixon and Elvis Presley that was taken on December 21st, 1970. Why would the king want to meet the president? It's interesting that to this day, that is the single most requested photograph in the history of the U.S. National Archive. But why did the king want to meet the president? Elvis was in his white fringe jumpsuit period, and when he showed up that morning at the White House, he was actually wearing a purple velvet jumpsuit, a gold belt, and the Secret Service had to relieve him of a Colt .45 pistol. He had presented a personal letter to President Nixon to the Executive Protection Service guards at the White House that said, quote, "I have done in-depth study of drug abuse and communist brainwashing techniques, and I'm right in the middle of the whole thing where I can and will do the most good," the 35-year-old rocker wrote in his letter to Nixon. He noted that young people see him as one of them, thus making him the perfect person to help in the fight against illegal drugs. "I would love to meet you just to say hello if you are not too busy," Elvis wrote. Elvis, a collector of police badges, actually wanted a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and wanted to be named a federal agent at large. Priscilla Presley, Elvis's then wife, wrote in her memoirs, Elvis and Me, that the narc badge presented some kind of ultimate power to the king. With the federal narcotics badge, she wrote, Elvis believed he could legally enter any country, both wearing guns and carrying any drugs he wished. She would later note that Elvis made a distinction in his mind behind the illegal drugs popular in the summer of love and the prescription drugs that would ultimately take his life from abuse. Now, there is no transcript of what must have been a somewhat bizarre meeting, although in 2016 an actual movie was made entitled Elvis and Nixon, which starred Kevin Spacey as Nixon and Michael Shannon as Elvis. What we do know about that fateful meeting comes mostly from a memo written by one of Nixon's aides. Nixon mentioned that he thought Elvis could reach young people, but it was important for Presley to retain his credibility. Presley responded that he did his thing just by singing. He said he could not get to the kids if he made a political speech on stage, but he had a way to reach them in his own way. Nixon nodded in agreement. Elvis indicated that he thought the Beatles had actually been a real force for anti-American spirit. Elvis said the Beatles came to this country, made their money, and then returned to England, where they promoted an anti-American theme. It is recorded that Nixon nodded but expressed some surprise. Nixon then indicated that those who use drugs are also those in the vanguard of anti-American protest. Violence, drug abuse, dissent, and protest all seem to merge generally in the same group of young people, as far as Richard Nixon believed. The king indicated to the president in a very emotional manner that he was, quote, on your side. Elvis Presley kept repeating that he wanted to be helpful, that he wanted to restore some respect for the flag, which was being lost. He mentioned he was just a poor boy from Tennessee who had gotten a lot from his country, and he wanted to find some way to repay it. As I mentioned earlier, he also said he'd been studying communist brainwashing and the drug culture for over 10 years. He mentioned he knew a lot about this and was accepted by the hippies. He said he could go right into a group of young people or hippies and be accepted, which he felt could be helpful in his anti-drug drive. The president indicated again that his concern that Presley retain his credibility. At the conclusion of this bizarre meeting, Presley again told the president how much he supported him, and then in a spontaneous gesture, put his left arm around President Richard Nixon and hugged him. Now, the badge that was presented to Elvis Presley was an honorary one, but Elvis never knew that. He thought it was the real thing. Strangely enough, according to members of Elvis's band who accompanied him to the meeting with the 37th president, Elvis was high as a kite. Elvis actually brought a pair of antique dueling pistols to give Nixon as a gift for the meeting, but that set off alarm bells with the Secret Service when it was put over the radio that Elvis Presley was in the White House and he had a set of pistols with him. After the meeting, Elvis Presley, who I remind you was wearing a purple velvet jumpsuit, a gold cape, and a giant gold belt with a medallion, was asked what he thought of Richard M. Nixon. "He's a really groovy cat," the king said, "but he dresses kind of funny." And that is the inside story on the historic meeting between Richard Nixon and Richard Nixon and the greatest rocker of his age, Elvis Presley. You can go online and see that picture. It is, as I said, the single most requested picture from the National Archives.